Most Western countries have quietly ignored a continent for many years, a region they fly over on their way to bigger deals, markets, and news stories. Right now, that region is looking at Canada and saying, "We heard you. Here's what no one saw coming." Mark Carney wasn't just talking about Europe when he said, "If we're not at the table, we're on the menu" at Davos in January. He didn't just talk to Asia. He was talking to all the middle-sized countries in the world that are sick of being stuck between Washington and Beijing. Neither Germany nor Japan replied as strongly as South Africa. Instead, South Africa began quoting Carney's words in its own parliament and in its own press. Before we go any further, I want you to understand this. This isn't a happy story about shaking hands and holding press appearances together. This is a story about a strategic opening that will either make or break Canada's next 50 years. We'll either miss it while we're busy congratulating ourselves. But this is where things get tricky because, well, Canada's history with Africa is just plain bad. That's not meant to be mean. The amounts show it. A report from a Senate committee in December 2024 revealed that Canada's trade with the whole of Africa made up less than 1% of its total trade that year. 1%. In 2024, Canada, a G7 country, sent only $583 million worth of goods to South Africa. What's even scarier about that number? It's pretty much the same number we posted in 2006. It has been flat for almost 20 years. While France, Germany, and even Italy made more bold plans for the continent, Ottawa didn't do much. Then this took place. When Trump showed up, he messed everything up. As of August 7, 2025, South African goods sent to the U.S. were subject to a 30% tax, the worst rate given to any country in sub-Saharan Africa. Right away, the South African Reserve Bank said that up to 100,000 jobs were in danger. The auto industry, which used to send cars to the U.S., saw its exports drop by more than 80% almost overnight. The old trade map didn't just change for South Africa, it broke. And that's exactly when Canada entered the picture. But I want you to think about this while we read the story. When there are 1.4 billion people in the market, this is the African Regional Free Trade Area, which is the world's biggest free trade area. And it's not a question of whether Canada should be there when that market is looking for new partner, supply line, and ally. The question is whether or not Canada can even get there on time. This part kept me up all night because South Africa is where Canada could start its journey into that 1.4 billion person market. A country that is democratic, has a lot of natural resources, and is becoming more stable. It is also actively and desperately looking for a trading partner to replace the American market it just lost. What does Canada do? It sends people from the farm business to a trade show in Saskatchewan. I will tell you exactly what was promised and what was given, as well as why the difference between them could be Canada's most important foreign policy story right now. But first, let me show you why this window closes after a while. South Africa's economy is not in bad shape right now, as Western economists have said for years. The country used to be crippled by power outages, but those are over now. Its currency has reached its strongest level in 3 years. It looks like the economy is growing again. The Economic Advisory Group to President Ramaphosa says that Canada is a key possible trading partner. A big news outlet was told by his own economists that they want progress this year, not in 10 years. And Carney's speech at Davos was so important because it happened at just the right time, not because it got a standing ovation or made the news. It was clear to South Africa that they were right. It didn't need to make political moves or use strategy papers. That phrase made it clear right away that it was itself. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. There is no comment there. That's a change in geopolitics that most experts haven't fully tracked yet. And we're going to talk about what it means and what's not being talked about. Let me take you back to the G20 meeting in Johannesburg in November 2025. At the NASCAR Expo Center, Mark Carney and Cyril Ramosa are sat next to each other. There were cameras rolling and flags behind them, and the whole international show was on display. There were 3 real projects that came out of that meeting. It sounded like a real shift on paper. First, talks are going on to make a deal to protect and encourage foreign investment. Second, a business trip from South Africa to Canada. Third, the opening of a FinDev Canada office in Cape Town. FinDev is a development finance company that would help Africa's fastest growing economies get more Canadian money. I will now tell you what really happened with each of those, because this story gets complicated when it comes to the follow-through. It will be up to people to carry out Carney's idea for middle power relationships that will decide whether it is realistic or not. Start with the agreement to protect your cash. These are common tools used in trade architecture. You need them before you can have real bilateral investment. That sounds important, right? But South Africa has been very unwilling to sign these deals for more than 10 years. The country has backed out of similar talks with other partners many times. People who follow these deals say it could take years and years to even reach an outline agreement, let alone a treaty that everyone has to follow. Then this took place, the trade trip that was meant to show that Ottawa was serious about working with Toria. It turned out to be a group of people from the farming business visiting a trade show in Saskatchewan for agricultural equipment. I want to be fair. It's better to trade than not to trade at all. Not Greg Knott, who is the head of the Southern Africa-Canada Chamber of Commerce and has been working to build this bridge for years. He came out and said it. He said the goal wasn't clear enough. To paraphrase, he said that you miss half of the chance if you don't go where the money and the people who make decisions are. There is no way that a trade show in Saskatoon can replace high-level talks in Ottawa and Toronto. He's right. He's not the only reviewer who thinks this way. Another person who didn't hold back was David Black, a professor at Dalhousie University who has studied ties between Canada and Africa for decades. He said that there isn't much proof of real, long-term, high-level engagement with African partners. If you want to really diversify your approach and build a middle power coalition, he said, you should include Africa. South Africa is the best place to start. But what I'm about to show you makes everything different. The FinDev office in Cape Town. This was supposed to show that Canada meant business, a permanent presence on the continent, a way for development capital to flow, and an example of how the whole Africa plan could work. And Ottawa's own Africa policy document, which came out in March of this year, made it clear that this office would be open by the end of 2025. It's not open. There is still no set date for the opening as of right now. A representative said it would happen sometime this year. It won't just be about South Africa when it finally opens either. It is going to be in charge of projects all over Africa. There is 54 countries on one region and one office. South Africa's pitch to Canada and the rest of the world is that it's the gateway to the African Continental Free Trade Area. Let me take a moment to talk about what that means tactically. A market of 1.4 billion people and a lot of minerals, such as platinum, lithium, chromium, and rare earth elements that are important for the switch to green energy. A middle class that is young and growing quickly, a legal system based on English common law, a democracy government, and infrastructure that grows faster than almost every other economy on the continent. There aren't any poor people in need of help here. This is a smart way to get into the 21st century's fastest growing market. Canada plans to cover it with one office one day. When they get around to it, it gets worse now. Canada is still thinking about how to set up its office in Cape Town, but China is already there. Not going to be there. Already there. South Africa's solar energy industry is mostly run by Chinese companies. As a direct response to Trump's 30% tax, Beijing just signed a new deal with Pretoria that lets more South African goods enter the country duty-free. China is taking over South Africa's lost export potential right now. There are still strategy papers being passed around in Canada, but European companies have already staked out South Africa's green energy build-out. French companies are working on building projects in the country. Germany has trade ties in the world. Italy is still ahead of Canada in terms of volume, even though, as I said before, Italy is not known for having an aggressive approach in Africa. The uncomfortable truth is that this is what Carney's team has to face. If the alliance is only partly built in some places, the middle power framework won't work. If you leave out the region with the fastest growth on the blueprint, you can't call yourself the architect of a new global order. There is a political will to do it. The interests really do line up. That's what South Africa needs. Credibility, a safe democratic partner, and access to the United States capital. What South Africa has is what Canada needs. Important minerals, a way to reach 1.4 billion customers, and a reliable political base in the global south. On the other hand, political will that isn't put into action is just words. There is a big enough difference between what Carney said at Davos and what Canada is doing in Toria right now to get a trade group through. What the mass media isn't talking about when they talk about Carney's middle power push. Everyone is interested in Europe, the trade rules between the EU and NATO, and the democratic ideals that all members of the Western Alliance share. This is a true story. It relates to. But the middle power alliance that Carney talked about at Davos, the one that could really change the way global trade works, doesn't exist without the global south. And if South Africa has the most advanced economy in Africa, and Africa as a whole is growing the fastest, then what's going on in Toria right now is not a side story. It's a test case or proof of idea. A test to see if Carney's vision can handle being in touch with the real world. But now comes the twist that I don't think even Carney's own advisors fully understand. South Africa is moving toward Canada for more than just Trump's 30% tax. It's the clash of three different shocks at the same time. All of these shocks are coming together to make a window that is especially good for Ottawa, but only if Ottawa moves. The American market is the first shock. Trump's tariffs did more than just make South African items more expensive. It wiped out whole companies. More than 80% less cars are being sent to the U.S. There will be huge problems in citrus, textiles, and mining tools. The South African Reserve Bank said that up to 100,000 jobs had been lost. That's not a vague idea. That's a political problem for President Ramaphosa, and it means that his government really needs to find new markets quickly. Shock 2. How the BRICS get in the way. South Africa has been a part of BRICS since 2010, and for many years, membership was a safety net, a way to keep ties with China and Russia while staying connected to the West. But there's a catch. It's not getting easier to understand BRICS. With new members from the Middle East and Southeast Asia, the bloc has grown a lot. And as the bloc becomes more diverse and leans more toward totalitarian forms of government, South Africa's place within it becomes a tougher political sell at home. Analysts in South Africa are starting to ask out loud, is BRICS still good for South Africa, or is it turning into a problem? You know what kept me up last night? This part. If South Africa is losing access to the American market and questioning its BRICS alignment at the same time, that's not a country moving toward Beijing. That's a country that's looking for a third way. Mark Carney just named that third way. The third shock is the free trade area for the whole of Africa. Most Western experts have taken the longest to understand this piece. There is no such thing as an AFCA. It is an active trade framework that is lowering tariff barriers in 54 African countries over time. In real life, this means that South Africa, which already has the most developed financial sector, the best infrastructure, and the largest capital markets on the continent, is ready to become the center for all continental trade. When a Canadian business gets serious with South Africa today, it's not just getting into one market. It could give people access to the whole continent through a single secure entry point based on English-speaking rules. That's not even the whole story. What I think is truly wrong with this situation is this. Carney's strategy for Africa isn't going slowly because it hasn't been planned out well. It's going slowly because of how things are planned out. He said it himself at a press meeting in Johannesburg. He admitted that he first paid attention to places with better short-term results: India, Asia Pacific, and Europe. He said it was like having a duty to get the most out of things. In a strategic sense, that's also not wrong. You strengthen your situation before you make it bigger. When building the Middle Power Alliance, you start in the places where it's easiest and fastest, and then you add to it. Things go wrong because South Africa's chance won't wait for Canada to set things up. China isn't following the order. South African goods can already sell their goods in China duty-free. European companies are already working with South Africa to change its energy system. Already, the AFCA is taking down walls. The rand is getting stronger already. The power outage is over. Every structural advantage that made South Africa a chance to wait for later 5 years ago. Right now, those walls are falling down. These other countries can see it too. This is the question I keep coming back to when I want to analyze something. People have said that Carney's Middle Power Coalition is made up of democracies that work together to uphold shared ideals, trade based on rules, and mutual sovereignty. All of those things are true about South Africa. This is a democracy. The rule of law guides its work. Its government has made it clear that it wants a trade relationship with many countries that isn't based on a single powerhouse. Washington's trade war has burned it up. It is becoming less and less comfortable as it sees Beijing's power grow. The Middle Power Coalition is currently not actively recruiting South Africa. If they are not doing so with real resources, such as political bandwidth and trade infrastructure, then what are they recruiting for? There's nothing hard about this math. For its energy shift, Canada needs certain minerals. Platinum, chromium, manganese, and vanadium can be found in South Africa. These are all important materials for battery technology, fuel cells, and the green grid infrastructure that Canada says it is making. A steady market and money are what South Africa needs. Both are in Canada. The trade relationship between two resource-rich democracies that are both being hurt by the same superpower tariff system is still at the same level it was in 2006. It shouldn't be a hard sell. Still, the sell isn't being made quickly enough. It's getting late, and China is already in the room. Let me tell you the truth about where this stands. I mean, really and truly honest. It's not the spin in official communications, the hope in trade ministry news releases, or the cynicism of critics who see every diplomatic move as a show. This is the truth. Carney's idea of a middle power is more than just words. He has signed trade and security agreements on 4 countries in less than a year as Prime Minister. He built a relationship with the European Union that is getting stronger. He is working hard with India, Japan, South Korea, and other important friends in the Asia-Pacific region. The building blocks of a real alliance are being put together. That's not nothing. That's actually quite fast for a leader who has to deal with a historically unstable global situation and a trade threat from the US at the same time. Also, this is true. The Africa file is way behind schedule. That's not because the intention isn't there. It's just that the performance hasn't kept up with how important it is right now. This is where things get tricky again. People who say that the Cape Town office moves too slowly, that trade trips are too limited, and that talks on an investment protection treaty have stalled are really correct. But I think they're wrong about the outlook because the strong foundations that hold this relationship together aren't going away. If anything, they're getting stronger. The economy of South Africa is stronger now than it has been in years. The rand is higher than it has been in 3 years. The electricity crisis that made people afraid to spend is over. The AFCA is growing, and Trump's 30% tariff has done most of Canada's political work for it, even though it's been bad for South African workers and businesses. The thing that Ottawa has been hesitant to offer is now being openly sought by Pretoria. What I'm about to show you changes everything. Most experts get this one thing about middle power alliances wrong. They think that the alliance is only useful for defense. It's about standing up to big power's pressure. That's a part of it. But what's really important is upsetting. It's about making new economic links, trade routes, and supply lines that don't go through Washington or Beijing. And that's where the Canada-South Africa connection could really make a difference. Think about what a real relationship between Canada and South Africa would be like in 5 years. A bilateral investment deal protects Canadian mining companies, which are some of the smartest in the world, when they work in South Africa. Platinum and chromium from South Africa are flowing into Canadian battery supply lines. This makes Canada less reliant on materials that are processed in China. Moving south are manufactured goods and farm tools made in Canada. South African wines, farm goods, and manufactured goods are coming to the Canadian market. Behind it all is a FinDev Canada office in Cape Town that directs development capital into infrastructure projects across the continent. This gives Canadian companies the connections and the place they need to compete with Chinese state-backed investment in Africa's fastest-growing economies. That's not just a dream. Every part of that situation is possible. There is a party alignment. There is a real business complementarity. That is, the strategic objectives are the same for both sides. There isn't enough haste. Now, I'll say the hardest thing I have to say about all of this. Many people thought Carney's speech at Davos, "If we're not at the table, we're on the menu," was the most important foreign policy comment from a Western leader in years. A statement was what it was called. A standing applause was given. It started a talk around the world about how middle powers can work together. But that line isn't just a call to action for other people. So Canada can see how well it does, because Canada needs to show that it can build ties with countries that aren't usually associated with the West if it wants to lead a group of middle powers. It needs to show that its plan isn't just the old G7 club with a new name and better messages. It needs to show that when it talks about shared ideals and shared sovereignty, it also means Toria and not just Tokyo and Paris. The next 6 to 12 months will be very important. There will be real tools and a real mission when the FinDev office in Cape Town opens, not just a presence to send a message. It will send a message if Canada switches from trade shows with a narrow focus to real high-level business missions in Johannesburg and Cape Town. It sends a message if the FPA talks move forward with real movement instead of just bureaucratic drift. It looks like South Africa is there. Its lawmakers use quotes from Carney in the House. Delegations are coming from its business community. Its trade experts have said in public that they want things to get better this year. There is goodwill. The lineup is there. From the South African side, the need is clear. Canada needs to now show up. Here's what I really think. Carney's plan for a middle power is working where Canada was the first to act. Europe is in. Asia Pacific is getting stronger. There is an alliance, and it's getting bigger. A coalition that doesn't have Africa in it, though, isn't a global alliance. It's a fancy country club with an interesting theme, as well as the area where 2.5 billion people will live by 2050. This is the continent that has the important minerals that every green energy shift needs. You can't just think about that area later. The answer from South Africa was, "We're on the menu." Now we need to see if Canada is ready to pull out a chair. I'm interested in what you think. Do you think Canada is going fast enough? If not, it could miss the biggest strategic chance of this decade. Tell me what you think.